All right, Julika, take it away.
Okay, very good. Hello, everyone. It is wonderful to be here with you all. And I am excited to get to talk about one of my favorite topics these days, which is strategies to staying and returning to your resilient zone. And so we will jump right in. What we're going to look at today, and let me just make sure I have all my controls right here, is we're going to start by looking at the science that's behind resilience. Then we'll talk about strategies to stay in your resilient zone. And we'll also talk about strategies to returning to your resilient zone, and then how you can contribute to building resilience in your own families as well in your community. And we'll mention some resources and have some time for questions and answers. I am not sure if there's a chat function. If there is, then I welcome you to write your questions in there as well. And maybe Joanna, if you could keep track of those for us, that would be wonderful. Then we can get that in the end and respond to anything that is there. So this workshop is going to be, I would not call it interactive, but active, as I will be asking you to take some moments to write things down and to reflect. So when we are getting to those times, I will let you know, but it would be great if you could have a pen and paper handy, and hopefully we'll have the ability then too to write some notes into the chat in response to the reflections. So I hope if it doesn't make quite sense quite yet, then we're going to hopefully make a lot more sense of it as we get into it. So if you're anything like me, instructions make sense when you get right to them. So I think the only instructions that we need to get right to right now is, again, just to make sure your microphone is muted as well as your video is off, just because that is going to allow everyone a broader bandwidth and hopefully make sure that we have great sound and video, or great sound quality, basically. All right. So a little bit about Cornell Cooperative Extension, who I am here representing today. Cornell Cooperative Extension is represented throughout the state of New York, connected to Cornell University, and the extension's mission is really to bring research-based information into our communities in order to contribute to the well-being of everyone. We have particular program areas that we focus on extensively. One is ag, so agriculture, which is for our farmers and farm workers, and then also our horticulture, so gardening and home gardening as well as community gardening, youth development, that's through the 4-H program, and then lastly the family and consumer sciences program area, which is where I am, which houses parenting education, financial management, and nutrition and nutrition education. So lots of programs, a ton of free resources. I invite you to go to our website in your counties respectively. If you're all in Orange County, I'm not quite sure, then of course the Orange County Cornell Cooperative Extension, but otherwise do visit the other counties as well. I am also in the middle of coordinating the Orange County Resilience Project, which has sort of partnered with the library system, and some of you might have attended the film Screening Resilience and the discussion that followed, and that is also offered in that context. So we will go to a little bit more about that, and you're welcome to ask questions in the end. But I'm sure you really would like to hear more about really what the strategies are, what is resilience, and what are we talking about. Just a note real quick, we've held the community discussions with close to 1,500 community members. And the picture that you can see here with the hands and the heart in the middle is the result of all of the feedback and the input that came from all these community discussions. So it's a very real and alive graphic that I am here happy to share with you, and that is hopefully carrying us a little bit through this time as well. Okay, so what is resilience? If we look at the origin of the word, it comes from the Latin word resiliere, which means rebound or coil, to spin back, to go back to its original form. The Merriam-Webster dictionary tells us that it is defined as the ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. There's a whole discussion about resilience as in being able to recover from adversity and adapting to change. And so it means also that there is the whole concept of change is embedded in that as well. So resilience has to do with that. If we're talking in this context, just a little bit broader, sort of, it's a really, really popular word. I would be surprised if you haven't heard the word resilience in any of the program offerings that you've seen come across your screen or through your email inbox. It's a term that has gained a lot of popularity through the film Resilience, especially in our community here in this area, which sort of documents the science of or the impact of trauma, and as well as the science of it documents the biology of stress and the science of hope. So basically the impact of stress on our physiology, and as well as on our mental health, and then basically the concept of resilience. But really, in this context here, I want to sort of add to the rich understanding that we are beginning to gain from diving deeper into this whole concept of resilience. So initially, in trauma or in the mental health world, we talked about folks who've experienced specific trauma or significant trauma, and they're able to recover from that. So that's what is called resilience. We also know in the recovery field, and I'm talking here about disaster recovery, so maybe not a pandemic, but an environmental disaster. The concept resilience has been very familiar and utilized to develop approaches in disaster recovery, in particular through organizations that come and assist the victims to be able to overcome the tragedies that they have experienced. And then a third component to that is sort of introduced probably not as long ago, but is confirming a lot of the work and the thought and the research that has been going into this whole concept, comes from neuroscience. So brain science has been in this has shaped how we see and understand resilience. Okay, so now I want to talk for a moment about the mechanisms of stress, because obviously if we're talking about resilience, then that means that there has been some form of adversity, otherwise we wouldn't necessarily need resilience. So that's why I want to talk about brain science for a moment. If you can see at the bottom of the screen here, you see this red part and the green part, this sort of lower part down here, is what we refer to as the reptilian brain, or the stem part of the brain. Reptilian really because it refers to the amygdala, and the amygdala is what is considered the oldest part in the body that has developed or evolved the least in our human evolution. And it has a really important function to help us to survive. This is sort of we call the amygdala the smoke detector in our brain. It helps us detect when, the house is on fire. And I will get to how that interacts in a moment. Then this middle part here, as you can see, sort of this part is considered the limbic part of the brain. That part is the part that houses our emotions, our feelings, and all of the mechanisms that are associated with those biological reactions in our body. There is something that was an interesting definition for that is like a feeling is a action requiring neurological program. And so basically what is taking place here, right? So the mechanisms of these emotions are housed right here, and they then get activated and set a whole program in motion that starts how the communication between all these different parts in the brain. And then we have here the neocortex, the frontal lobes, and this is the part that is responsible for reasoning, decision making, basically understanding. The entire brain is fully developed between the ages of 25 and 30. So that does not mean that children don't have access to decision-making parts in their brain. However, how all of this is rewired, how all the neurological pathways are wired in the brain is still in development. And so because it is still developing, it just means that the parts are not fully developed. There's also something called plasticity in the brain, which basically tells us that the brain continues to evolve throughout our entire lives. And we do have the capacity to change patterns. It takes work because it means you have to literally rewire your neurological pathways, but it's absolutely possible. So the way these interact is that basically, and this is important to understand, if here the blue part of the brain, everything is going fine, let's say you're taking a stroll in the woods and everything is going fine, and all of a sudden you see a bear. And so what happens is that now you may feel afraid or a little shock or, oh my God, you're just stunned. So basically you have a really sudden feeling. It's that's taking place right here in the limbic part of the brain. And the feeling goes, oh my God, I'm afraid. And so it goes so fast that the smoke detector, the amygdala, is now saying, wait a minute, did I hear fear? Oh my God, this is dangerous. We have to do something. So the amygdala immediately releases cortisol and adrenaline, and basically what that does is communicates to the rest of the brain everything. The blood flow has to go away from the higher part of the brain into the lower part of the brain, so the lower part of the brain can quickly communicate to the rest of the body what we have to do to survive, which in this case may be pumping the heart a lot faster, getting you more air in by breathing faster, and then directing more blood flow into your arms and to your legs so you can potentially run and defend yourself, right? So this is what is so-called the famous fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. And so what happens is that now, let's say you're in safety and everything is great and your body is able to, release the toxins and blood flow starts to normally take place again. And here's now where you can start thinking about this. Wow, that was really dangerous. I can't believe I did it, right? So you have some feelings here. First of all, you're still feeling a little shaky and all that until you calm down, and then you can start to reason again and you can think about, oh, maybe next time you do something better, or who are you going to tell about this? Or maybe you want to learn a little bit more about how to respond in case you meet a bear. So if you had asked yourself all these questions right here while you were in that situation, it would have been incredibly dangerous, and the lower part of the brain would not have been able to take you away from that difficult situation or the dangerous situation. And so, therefore, this is a very important mechanism that really helps us to survive. However, what happens when we feel really stressed the entire time is that the amygdala continuously has some kind of smoke signals going on, so to speak, telling us, hey, you have to be careful, something is going on. It means that the rest of the blood flow in the body is still, sort of on a level that is higher stress. That's why we see higher blood pressure, higher maybe a lighter sleep, for example, and other symptoms that, when we feel irritability and so forth, and we'll come to that in a little bit more. But that's kind of how the brain interacts. The other thing that I want to say, and this is what we have known about trauma, is that first of all, the brain doesn't always distinguish between what is real danger and what is imagined danger. When you're sitting in the movie and you're having like, oh my God, what is happening? You're watching something that is so suspenseful, you might even get sweaty hands. So that's a physical reaction to the to what your brain is watching. So it means that and this is why the amygdala is sometimes, that reptilian brain, in the sense that it's not very smart, so to speak, in the sense that it can distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. And this is why it's so important that we keep this higher part of the brain functioning, because that can help us discern and distinguish between what is real and what is imagined, what is actually happening right now, or what are some future worries. So that's important. The other part is that if we are growing up with a lot of responses where we are constantly living in fear, let's say we've witnessed domestic violence and our parents or a caregiver getting drunk a lot and not being reliable, and we're constantly walking on eggshells, this part of the brain here might be more developed than this part of the brain, the higher part. And so therefore, we have a faster fight, flight, or freeze response, or are more reactive. And so these are all things we can learn as we go along, the more we engage all of these parts of the brain. And that's sort of what we're looking at today. Okay, so here is a picture, and if I was to ask you which one do you think is a picture or a scan of the stressed brain, a lot of people will go, this is the stressed brain, the left picture here. However, what we see here is that there's a lot more blood flow, basically, that is highlighted in the brain, which means that the higher parts of the brain that we just looked at also are flooded with blood, which means it's working. Whereas here, you can only see the ones, the centers highlighted here, that are connected to the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. So in that sense, you can really see how different our brain looks when we are feeling stressed. And I'm talking about serious stress here, not just, stressed about, oh, I forgot my shopping list at home, or, maybe even a little bit more that, say you have a wedding coming up, or a child is born, or a new job or something. There are also good stressors, but what we're talking about here is really more kind of toxic stress that continues. Okay, so let's talk about our resilient zone. So the resilient zone here is basically the zone here at the center where we are able to self-regulate, where we feel safe and where we feel connected. And in this center here, where all of that is possible, is basically where we're also then able to respond as opposed to react. So if my child comes to me and tells me she just burned the brownies that she's baking upstairs, given that there might be certain things going on in my life, let's say I was stressed about my income, or, worried a bill may be shut off, or I've had an argument with my partner, then it's much more likely that I will just react and scream, why can't you get your brownies out of the oven on time? Whereas if I am, fairly feeling in my resilience zone, basically feeling okay and able to self-regulate, then I will say, okay, here, let's see how we can troubleshoot the situation, right? So that's basically the thing. So in other words, there are always triggers that will come and basically get us. That's just how life is. Obviously, and I am not diminishing this, there are some triggers that may be, much smaller triggers, and then there might be really big triggers, really big adversities, really big problems and challenges that we may be facing. So, granted, these all come in, and then the question is, how are we able to respond to these? And so what can happen sometimes is that we may feel sort of stuck in the higher zone, right, of this resilience zone. If you were to look at this from a perspective of like an up and a down, this, graphic that I show you there. So the higher zone on this would be that you might be experiencing some edginess or irritability, or you feel anxious or panicky. You might get angry really quickly and, experience some mania or pain. Those are all signs that, that we're out of our resilience zone. If you remember the brain picture, the image that we just saw of the brain, it basically means that the yellow part of your brain, the limbic part, is a little bit more activated because you're feeling all of these really big feelings. If you're stuck in what we call the lower zone of the of your resilience zone, then you might feel depression or sadness or isolation. And I'm not talking about the isolation that we're experiencing right now, even though that may also be a feeling that you have. You may feel exhaustion or fatigued. You may feel numbness. Any of those kinds of feelings are indicators that you are not in the center or within this healthy realm of your resilience zone right here, right? So that's basically the indicator. So what we're working towards, we're not trying to say, okay, we're going to be immune to all adversities. No, but what we're going to say is that we're strengthening our resilience zone, which is somewhere here, and we're expanding it and expanding it and expanding it so that we are able to respond in a way that we come to our own center, or our ability to be healthy and well, to our best ability in that sense. So that's kind of the resilience zone that we're looking at. Okay, so let's take a deep breath for a moment before we go to the next slide. So what I want you to think about right now, because what I'm talking about here is that the resilience zone, the feelings that we just looked at, right? If we're in the higher zone where we feel maybe more anxious or angry, whereas in the lower zone more depressed, those are all basically triggered by sensations that our body is feeling. So because that's how the nervous system really works in our physical body. So here is where we're looking at. So when we have these sensations, it basically begins to have that string of communication that then tells the brain what to do with the rest of the body, what hormones or chemicals to release in order to optimize our ability to survive. And so if we're able to track the sensations that we have in our body, and we're able to redirect them, because we can talk about, obviously you don't want to do that if you are in the middle of facing a bear. But if you are in a situation that is generally safe, let's say even if you are faced with really big life challenges, then, at this moment, this is what we're going to do. So tracking our sensations is basically, so oftentimes, in meditation or maybe even through mindfulness you might have practiced or heard or read about, is that you are scanning your body and you're asking, what am I feeling right now? Here the question is really, I want you to think about, and we can do this all together right now, if you just sit back for a moment and, sort of close your eyes or just feel comfortable with yourself, and you think about sensations that you're experiencing in your body. And I'm talking about either neutral or pleasant sensations. So, for example, I kind of threw my back out a little bit this morning. I'm not going to focus on the pain. I am going to focus on what is a pleasant sensation. So it could be the material of the clothes you're wearing on your skin, or maybe how you're able to relax into your chair, or sensation of feeling your air entering your nostrils. Anything that is either pleasant or neutral. So when you have that sensation, I want you to source and think about a time, something that makes you really happy or fulfills you. So, the other day I was talking to a friend and she shared that her granddaughter just makes her so happy. The thought of her granddaughter just even, brightened her face. Or, I can think about my grandmother actually, just the thought of her makes me so happy. And it could be a vacation that you've been to, it could be a place you've been to, it could even be something totally fictional, a dream that you have that makes you so happy. And so when you're feeling that neutral, pleasant sensation in your body, and you're now connecting this image, this feeling that you have to that, and you just let that sink in for a moment. And then the grounding is where you're going to reconnect or connect yourself with basically the ground underneath you. So feel the chair you're sitting on, or whatever object you're sitting on or standing on, really underneath. And feel how the floor or the ground is holding you up. Just kind of let that sink in. And that's sort of one strategy that can help us reconnect with our resilience zone and get back into that. And I can tell you right away that I, just going through this a little bit, feel a lot more, I feel a little bit more relaxed actually. So it's really lovely. So this is one thing that you can do, right? So it's tracking, sourcing, and then grounding yourself. And you can practice that over and over again. Okay, so now let's look at some more strategies that we can practice in order to continue to stay in that zone. So I don't know about you, maybe I'm a little bit nerdy that way. I'm definitely not a scientist, but I am very interested when I understand the reasons and the mechanisms behind something. Then it's so much easier for me to, let's say, really do something on purpose. So, for example, if I know that, feeling safe and feeling connected and being able to self-regulate, or feeling basically supported, what that means, those three areas are very critical for us to be able to stay in our resilience zone or to return to them. Those are the doors back into that zone. Then I feel like I have more control basically over the situation. And there's a lot that obviously we don't have control over. So this is really, really helpful. So here the feeling safe, right, is one of the factors that helps us. And so thinking about things that we can do to feel safe. So for example, gathering supplies. I mean, I don't want to make jokes about this, but the fact that we ran out of toilet paper is one of the first things as we, sort of were beginning to grasp the magnitude of this epidemic. We can just debate whether or not people really need that much toilet paper, but the fact is that that was one mechanism for folks to feel safe. They gather supplies. I have enough. I am safe. I'm good. Right? So another thing is following routines. We all know that when something new starts, I mean, just like this pandemic, the perfect example, nothing is the same. We're not going to work, or we're not going to school, or not going to specific places. Everything has to change. The way we go and, have to dress up to go to the supermarket. All of that is changed. So there's a changed routine. So if we can maintain other routines, like, brushing our teeth or getting up at a certain time, or what we have for breakfast, or we make a new routine. We introduce a game night on Thursdays or Wednesday or whenever that is, right? So those are things. Then we are able to focus on what we call is predictable. And if we're able to focus on what is predictable, we feel safe. And in that circumstance, feeling safe, remember, also has to do with the amygdala not constantly thinking, is there some smoke? Do I have to ring the alarm bell? No, we know we're safe. And this is when we're able to connect, where we're able to feel connected and have this middle part of our brain, the feeling part of our brain, stimulated again. So that means, talking to friends and family. And continuing to share family meals, playing games, having, intimate conversations with our friends or family, talking about what's really sort of underneath and being real about the situation that we might be in. All of that helps us feel connected. Obviously, our social media is there, and sometimes it may lead us to think we're connected, but really it leads to more isolation. So really asking and listening to your own body. What are the sensations, again, that you're feeling? Are the sensations more of like an anxiety, or are the sensations really pleasant and neutral, so that your amygdala can be calmed down, the middle part of the brain can really be sort of stimulated, and then be able to allow us to come back on. And that's when we're able to, what we say, or what we call, self-regulate. So that's when we're able to respond, when I'm not screaming at my daughter for burning the brownies, but where we're looking for solutions, right? So here is where I am responding as opposed to reacting. And sorry for the brownies thing, but that's actually going on right now. So I just have one ear for the oven. So then the other part, so what can we do to stay self-regulated, right? So staying physically active is really important. And this is, I'm not talking about importance here because of extra pounds during COVID, but no, because what we want to be sure is that the stress hormones that have been released into our system are really being worked out of the body, and that can take place through physical activity. So by moving, walking, stretching, whatever we're doing, we're able to move our blood flow in a way that it gets rid of the toxins in our body. And obviously, we all know the benefits of regular exercise, and that's really what it has to do with. Breathing techniques are wonderful. So, every now and then taking a deep breath, let's do that for a moment right now. So I'm just going to count to 4 to breathe in, and then we'll hold it for 4 and we'll breathe out for 4. Hold it, 1, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 1, 2. And one more time. Hold it and exhale. But just giving ourselves that breath is also helping our brain to be, our whole body actually, circulated with more oxygen, which then helps to move things along, and that really helps. Other things to help us get things off our chest is journaling or, meditating, as I was saying here earlier. So those are all strategies that we can do to feel sort of that self-regulated, connected, and safe. So what I want to ask you next is, here. So this is the pen and paper, right? So I want you to I'm going to give you a minute, and I will time this here, where you are going to ask yourself, what setup makes you feel safe, and what can you do that makes you feel safe, right? So what's a setup that makes you safe, and what can you do physically or actively or whatever helps you to feel more safe. So I'm going to let you basically think about that for a minute, and I'm going to put my timer on here. And sorry for the recording, but anyone listening to the recording can also take a pen and paper and write that down. Okay, very good. So I look forward to, if you want, you can in the chat write something in there, or you could keep it for the end, and maybe we'll have a chance to share a little bit about some of these strategies. But it's really great to share those out, because that sort of what's the word, solidifies, that understanding that you've come to, and it sort of brings that, this is a neurological connection that you're building in your brain, and the more you use it and talk about it, the stronger it gets, and then you'll remember to use it should you be in a situation where you need it. So here, next part is, what are some strategies or, that make you feel connected? What makes you feel connected, or when do you feel connected? And what can you do? You can always ask someone, hopefully, well, for a hug, I was about to say, but really it has to be someone who you live with at the moment. But so if you're not living with somebody, perhaps, even just giving your pillow a hug. Sometimes I have certainly hugged my pillow and it felt really wonderful. Anyways, maybe that's not the best example, and I'm sure you come up with something else. What makes you feel connected? And it doesn't just have to be physically. It could be anything, really. And I'm going to give you another minute to write that down. Okay, wonderful. Okay, and here's the last piece, and we're going to do this in about 30 seconds. And what I want you to think about is, what makes you feel supported? And here you can include all kinds of resources, or, whatever there is that you feel supports you. And what can you do actively so that you feel supported? I'm going to give you 30 seconds for this one. Okay, very good. So when, as I mentioned, we are aware of these parts in us that are, when we're able to make these neurological pathways, these connections in our brain, then that really helps us to continue with that, to strengthen these new connections and be able to apply what we came up with. So, right, that's kind of what we're hoping for. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about protective factors for families, because that's really kind of where that goes into. And I'm talking about your own families and your, whatever you describe as your family, whoever you see as part of your family, whether you're actually related or it's more of a friend family. But protective factors, basically factors that help us support our health and well-being on the whole. And this is really good information too for you to know in your positions in working in the library systems, because you are coming in contact with so many families. So it's a win-win, how I'd like to see these situations. So the National Alliance for Children's Trust and Funds basically identified 5 protective factors, and I sort of adjusted these a little bit here for our purposes and also incorporated some ideas of what we understand from other protective factor frameworks that have been developed. So one is parental or caregiver or adult resilience per se, right? So if an adult is able to really get into or operate most of the times from within their resilience zone, then they are indeed able to really respond to their situations outside, which supports family health and well-being. A second protective factor, which is huge, is social connections. So, and this is not just so that we know who to call or, we have somebody to a shoulder to cry on or something. This is also for sharing really great news. So if we feel connected, then our entire biology is impacted by these, nurturing connections. So this is, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, these social connections are really adding, as research tells us, to our general health and well-being. So having these and purposefully making these connections, I can share with you, I grew up in Germany and came here, and my husband is also not American, so we both, it's us and our 3 children. And, we're both very resilient and thought that, I thought for the longest time, well, I can do things myself and never ask for help. And, as a result, also didn't necessarily deepen my connections until I understood that social connections can so much enrich our lives. And of course, I knew this from the connections that I had built throughout my life. But I purposefully worked on deepening these connections, and I cannot tell you what a big difference this has made in my life in terms of my own sense of happiness and feeling rooted and being able to operate more from my resilient zone. The third factor here is knowing concrete supports in times of need, right? So if your car breaks down and you know who to call, whether it's, a personal friend or family member, or it's the AAA, or that the fact that you have a phone provider that might support you with, towing or whatever that might be. So basically, knowing concrete supports in times of need is a really important key in order for us to be able to feel somewhat in control of our situation and therefore get back or, into our resilient zone or stay there in the first place. Also, fostering social and emotional development. The National Alliance talks about this in relationship to children, but it's really in all of our relationships, right? So this means understanding, having empathy and being supportive and understanding of each other, being solution-oriented as opposed to conflict-oriented. Also understanding, with children that they're in maybe chronologically you have a certain age, but developmentally they're not quite, they're at a different stage basically. And so when we understand that and we can foster that and also understand when there's to expect a level of maturity, then we're able to support that feeling basically in others of feeling connected and safe and able to self-regulate. That's basically what that means. And then the last point here is understanding of parenting or child development per se. And here I'm also adding the social and emotional learning piece. As well as the impact of ACEs. So when we have an ACEs stands for adverse childhood experiences. So if we've had adverse childhood experiences as adults, then it is likely that our brain was wired in ways that it has a more or is more reactive. Remember, because the lower part of the brain is the part that takes over or just gets triggered much more easily. And so if we understand that impact on children, then A, for children, we're able to buffer these stressors, and B, for adults, we're able to be more responsive to their needs, and we can really see the question or ask question instead of asking, what is wrong with you? Why are you acting this way? We can ask, what happened to you? And so that makes a huge shift, right? So if we're coming from what's wrong with you and looking at all the mistakes and the things that are damaged, so to speak, and we're looking at what happened to you, and then we can even go further and ask, what is wrong with you, right? So that's the question where we're looking at, okay, what can you do? What has worked in the past? What works well? So here we're going back into the situation where we are able to be somewhat in control of, a generally uncontrollable situation, or what may be the factors that may be out of our control. So focusing on that allows us to get back into our resilience zone. Okay, so this is a lot of information here, and I want to also point out that when we're talking about resilience, it is really, really important that we understand that resilience is not something that just comes from ourselves within, right? So there are external factors that are, really captured well in this so-called social ecology, in that model here on the right-hand side that you can see. So you have the individual, right? Then you have the interpersonal, how we relate to our families and our social networks. Then you have the communities where, the different relationships between organizations and how each of these influence the individual. So this is where the library systems fall in, right? So that's part of that community as well. Then we have other organizations, other social institutions, that so maybe the libraries are somewhere here. And this is more focused on the actual relationships that we have maybe between you and the patrons, or within our faith-based communities or whatnot. And then the next part or ring here is really that social, the institutional level, organizationally. And then behind that, we have policies and the environment. So when we're talking about adversities that we may be facing, right, we say, oh, you just have to be more resilient, then you're basically putting all that responsible on the individual down here, when yet there are so many factors that are out of our control. And so I think, what we're seeing, for example, in terms of health equity right now, it's so crystal clear how all these factors in these outer circles are not supporting the individual, or have not supported the individual, which puts these individuals at a much, much higher risk, not because of their own inabilities or because they're not resilient, but because our systems and mechanisms around us are set up in a way that are not necessarily supportive. So the question therefore becomes, how can we be, we're basically assuming that everyone has resilience. That's an innate quality in all of us. And if we want to nurture that, then we have to build specific communities that sort of understand and support that through the protective factors and through environments that foster this resilient zone that we're talking about, as opposed to having structures that are debilitating to our own resilience. So the more obstacles that are coming in, the more difficult it becomes to get into that resilient zone. So therefore, and I'm mentioning this because, if you're able to be in your resilient zone, that's wonderful, and you learn these strategies, because then you can share these strategies and you can contribute to raising awareness about these strategies and what's important and required to be in them. And that then influences, our surroundings, our social ecology, all the way through our policies on a statewide, local, statewide, as well as national levels. So, and there is a really big conversation already taking place within this movement. I talked at the beginning that resilience is a really hot term, or it's, coming up everywhere. So there is a recognition of the impact of trauma on our health and well-being, physically and emotionally and mentally, as well as the science that really leads to us being more resilient in that sense. Oh, and in all of this, I have to point out that, asking for help is really cool. People who ask for help, they are rock stars. It's something that's not really easy, especially in a culture that, really celebrates the heroes and folks who pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But it really is a community effort to do all of that. And it's pretty cool to ask for help, because that helps us to get into that resilient zone, which makes us a much more effective member in our communities, and then we're able to contribute, at a different level. So before we go into this little bit of a Q&A and to hear if there was anything in the chat, I want to share with you a quote by Audre Lorde, and that talks about, only by living in harmony with our contradictions, with your contradictions, can you keep it all afloat. And why I chose this quote here is because, this is not about perfection. This is not about us having, it all together all the time. It's much more about recognizing these contradictions that we all have in ourselves. The things that we say versus the things that we actually do, the things we want versus the things that, our actions are, not necessarily aligned with. And so as opposed to living with these contradictions and being in constant conflict with ourselves, to just recognize it and to recognize life is messy. It's not about perfection. And the more we recognize it, the more we have, what some call the ability to surrender, or, we're able to take off the pressure and get back into that zone where we're able to reconnect to our ourselves and ground ourselves as we experienced, hopefully, even if it was for a minute. Okay, so now I would love to I don't even have a slide for there, so I'm going to leave the quote up. I would love to invite some comments here, and I do believe you can unmute yourself and turn your camera on if you want, and ask questions. And maybe, Joanna, if you have any questions from the chat that you could respond to, or read us.
So I just give everyone the option to unmute yourselves, so
Okay.
feel free to do that. There aren't any questions in the chat right now, but if you would like to type them, please do, and I will read them out to everyone.
But but you can also ask your question now that you have the ability to speak.
Yes, yes, please also ask questions out loud. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to get this sent to us, like the PowerPoint by any chance, just to take a look at it again, Julika?
Yeah, I could make that available. I can send that to Joanna and she can send it. Mm-hmm.
I really liked the quote at the end, by the way.
Yeah.
I know, it's just so true.
It's so true, yeah. And
Very
those are
accurate.
so, yeah, words are so wonderful.
I had a question. When you were saying understanding of parenting, and then you have the ACEs, which I understood because I saw the documentary last week, but what does SEL mean?
Social emotional learning.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I missed that one.
Yeah. I'm curious, is anyone interested or willing to share what you came up with, things that make you feel safe or connected or supported?
I'll answer. Oh, someone wrote something actually.
Yes, so Anita wrote, I think that everyone is having a hard time. I'm sorry, if you are not talking, please do keep yourself on mute just to cut down on background noise, but unmute yourself if you do want to make a comment. So someone wrote, I think that everyone is having a hard time accepting that it's okay to take time out. We're so used to constantly giving, and the guilt pushes us out of our resilient zone.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so that's a really great reflection, because I think that here is, so for example, here is a great moment, I think, where this tracking, the tracking what are your sensations, and then sorting, what are these the pictures or the ideas, the memories that make me feel really good or happy or and then regrounding. That's where we're able to discern, what is real versus what's imagined, and then we might find more space for us in that moment where we're giving ourselves permission to, to really just be.
Few answers to your question of what makes people feel safe. Someone wrote, what makes me feel safe are food shopping, showering, taking out the trash, getting gas, brushing my teeth. Another person said, eating healthy, a strong immune system makes me feel safe. Someone commented, gardening, planting, transplanting, and weeding. And another comment was, try to keep a daily routine and don't feel guilty if you need some time for yourself.
Yeah.
And actually,
absolutely.
Oh, go ahead, Julika.
No, absolutely. I'm just seconding. Thank you for sharing all those.
I do have to say that someone emailed me before the workshop to make sure it was going to be recorded, because she wanted to take some time off for herself and spend the rest of the day outside. So I think that's
wonderful.
That's right in line.
Yes. And you see, the thing is, it depends, of course, on your employment situation, but if you have the ability to have hours flexible, for example, and you need to go outside and just soak yourself up with some of the nature time and in gardening, you can do some of your work later on, then, why not shift those things around if that is possible? Finding those, finding these spaces and that flexibility is really important. And, understanding too, I woke up this morning, for example, and I just felt totally off, not physically in any way, but, emotionally. And all day I've been feeling like I just want to get under my cover. And that's okay. As opposed to saying, well, I shouldn't be feeling that, I totally gave myself permission to feel that way. And I cannot tell you how much I look forward tonight to just, snuggle under my blanket and and that's okay. And just being aware of that as opposed to constantly fighting it, which then, makes you feel anxious.
There are a couple of people in the chat so that they're sitting outside while watching or listening to this.
Awesome. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much. So,
I
yeah.
was just going to say my routine, like a lot of people are saying, that makes me feel safe, and I try to go on a walk every day, and that, even if it's raining, I'll go for a walk. That just by myself, and that helps me a lot to feel connected and not get, And I also cut myself a lot of slack because if I sleep a little longer, big deal. It's okay.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Great, wonderful. So I am aware that we are about 3 minutes over, and I want to thank you all so much for coming. This was really wonderful to be here with you all. And I hope you took something. And Joanna has my contact information, and you can find, of course, information on our website at cceorangecounty.org. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.